What's up, guys? I hope all of you are having a wonderful Christmas season. We're about 9 days out from UFC 219, and I think this event is really going to close the year out with a bang. There's a ton of matchups that I'm really excited about. There were also some fights that I was looking forward to that got scratched, but you know, I really can't complain here. I can't be ungrateful because there's so many good fights here. So without any further ado, let's get into the UFC 219 predictions, and I will be predicting the entire card. That means the Fight Pass prelims, the FS1 prelims, and the main card. So if you don't really care about me predicting certain fights, there's timestamps in the description, and you can skip all around the video to what fights you want to hear me predict. But other than that, yeah, let's get right into these predictions. For the first matchup on the Fight Pass prelims, we have Tim Elliot versus Marc de la Rosa. Tim is usually a flyweight, but this is going to be a bantamweight bout because Marc is taking this fight on short notice. Tim was supposed to fight last weekend actually at UFC Winnipeg, but his opponent had some weight issues and actually didn't even weigh in, so Tim was left without a fight at all. Marc was supposedly trying out for the new season of The Ultimate Fighter, which features only undefeated fighters. I'm not sure if he's still going to be able to do that now that he's taking this fight, but I don't see why he wouldn't. But respect to both of these guys, respect to Tim for being mature and getting rebooked fast, and respect to Marc for taking the fight at all, so hats off to both of these guys. But in terms of the actual fight, each of these guys have their own advantages. Tim is a UFC veteran and he's had a whole fight camp for this, but Marc is on an undefeated streak and this is in his weight class. But I just think the fact that he didn't have a full fight camp and he's never fought in the UFC before and he's immediately fighting a ranked guy who has had a full training camp, I see Tim taking this victory. I just think he's extremely experienced on top of the fact that he's had a full fight camp. Marc hasn't really fought the same level of competition that Tim has. Marc is really good on the ground. That's probably his best attribute, but I just think Tim's going to be able to overwhelm him. Although I don't see Tim finishing him. I mean, it could happen because Tim, I mean, you never know what he's going to bring to the table. But with this one, I predict that Tim is going to outwork Marc and grind out a decision. For the second and final matchup on Fight Pass, we have Marvin Vettori versus Omari Akhmedov. I have to say, I don't really think there's any clear advantages that puts one of these guys ahead of the other. They're both basically the exact same size, and they're both really well-rounded fighters. I think this is a close fight in the sense that either guy really could get it, but I'm leaning towards Marvin here. I think this fight's going to go to the ground, and Omari does have a couple of submission losses on his record, and as you can see, Marvin has submitted the majority of his victories. So I'm gonna make things interesting here, and I'm gonna say Marvin wins by submission. For the first fight on the FS1 prelims, we have Smolka versus Matheus Nicolau. Lewis is on a 3-fight losing streak, which doesn't look good at all. So he was 11-1, now he's 11-4. I mean, I don't know if you guys can do math or not. And Matheus is 12-2, and he hasn't lost in 2 fights. So on paper, he's been doing better recently. But I think this is going to come down to the classic quality of the opponents. Lewis lost to people that were world-renowned fighters, like top-ranked flyweights, and Matheus, I mean, he's been fighting decent guys, but nowhere near the guys that Lewis has been fighting. So I think this is another one of those matchups where it's going to be the UFC veteran picking apart a newcomer. But Matheus does have a little bit of UFC experience. He was on The Ultimate Fighter Brazil. He did not win, but he's also had 2 fights in the UFC. Probably his best victory was over John Moraga, but I mean, John Moraga is a guy that he either shows up to fight or he doesn't. I'm not saying that Lewis is going to destroy Matheus. I do think it could probably be a close fight, but I just think the fact that Lewis is the more experienced guy and he's the bigger guy, I think he's going to be able to grind out a decision. But what I do know is if he drops 4 straight losses, he's probably done in the UFC, so maybe that extra motivation will help him out with a win as well. For the first fight on the FS1 prelims, we have number 15 ranked Myles Jury versus Rick the Gladiator Glenn. This is the first fight that I'm really excited for because I'm expecting a brawl on the feet, just a back and forth battle. I'm pretty sure that Rick Glenn is the underdog, and I gotta say, I don't know about that because Rick looked amazing in his last fight. I mean, he put a striking clinic on Gavin Tucker, who was undefeated at the time. First of all, I don't think these stats on here are correct because Rick Glenn has a 76-inch reach, and I think his reach advantage is going to definitely add on to his ability to outstrike Myles Jury. I really think this is going to be a possible fight of the night contender. I don't want to jinx it, but I think it's going to be an amazing fight. Really excited for it. So despite Myles being the favorite, I gotta say I think Rick is gonna come in there and just outstrike him basically. So I think Rick is gonna either win by KO/TKO or decision. Next up, another great fight. We have Dan Hooker versus Marc Diakese. And this, in my opinion, is going to be another fight that's primarily striking, which is always interesting for the viewers. A lot of y'all are probably going to disagree with my prediction, but first I want to say this is really close in my head. If I thought it was a smart idea to predict a draw, maybe I would. I don't know. I'm just kind of feeling that. But I kind of think Marc got exposed a little bit in his last fight against Drakkar Klose. Dan Hooker obviously doesn't have a flawless record. Marc's record is much better. But for this one, I'm really just feeling Dan coming out with the W. So I got to say, I think a lot of y'all are going to disagree with me. But for this, I'm going to say Dan wins by decision. Next up, we have Khalil Rountree versus Michal Oleksiejczuk. I hope I pronounced that right. Seeing this fight on my screen instead of Khalil versus Gokhan Saki is honestly really depressing. I was really looking forward to that fight because I know it was going to be a brawl, but in my opinion, now this is probably one of the easier fights on the card to predict. I mean, this Michal or Michael guy has never fought in the UFC before, and he's taken this fight on pretty short notice. Also, Khalil has knocked out his last two opponents pretty easily. So for this one, not really much to analyze here. I just got to say Khalil by knockout in early, like round 1 or 2. The first fight of the main card features the long-awaited return of the natural-born killer Carlos Condit, and he faces Neil Magny, who recently got submitted in the first round by RDA. Back in the day, I would have said that Carlos destroys Neil, but he's obviously taken some time off. I'm pretty sure he hasn't actually won a fight since 2015. I think he had some brain injuries or like some head trauma or something that he had to stay out for. But anyway, this is kind of tough for me because if we had the Carlos Condit from 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say, yeah, Neil, he's going to beat Neil. But he's taken all this time off, and Neil had a little bit of a streak before he lost to RDA. But I still can't make myself say that Neil would win this. I just feel like if Carlos is coming back, then he's confident in his abilities. Carlos, to me, seems like a guy that understands if he's really ready to come back or not. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here that he at least got semi back to his prime or back to how he was before he left. So I think Carlos wins this by putting a lot of pressure on Neil, probably primarily with his punches, landing big strikes. Neil seems to crack under pressure, so here, like I said, I'm going to give Carlos the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to say Carlos by decision. For the second fight on the main card, we have undefeated Team Alpha Male prospect Cynthia Calvillo versus former UFC strawweight champion Carla Esparza. Basically, I just think Cynthia's on a streak that's not going to end for a while. She's a really good fighter, extremely well-rounded, as you can see. I think it's safe to say here that Carla is primarily a grappler, and I think Carla's greatest strength will play into how Cynthia beats her. Cynthia's from Team Alpha Male, and they obviously have a heavily grappling-oriented style, and she's really good in transitions, too, between positions. So this is kind of a short prediction, but I think Carla is going to try to grapple. Cynthia is going to allow that to happen, and she's going to end up catching Carla in some transition and submit her. So she's probably going to get a guillotine or a rear naked choke. If Cynthia submits Carla, like I think she will, then I definitely think we could see Cynthia challenging for the belt somewhere in the near future. 7-0, you can't argue with that. She'll probably be ranked like number 4 or something after this. So my prediction is Cynthia by probably a second round submission. Next up, we have Jimmie Rivera versus John Lineker, and I think that Jimmie Rivera is actually a better version of John Lineker than John Lineker himself. Jimmie has a great chin and he hits really, really hard. And he's on like a 20-fight win streak, so that's pretty amazing. I think we'll see him challenging for the belt sometime soon. Jimmie was originally supposed to fight Dominick Cruz, and that was another matchup that I was really, really excited for, so it sucks that it's not happening. But I'm not going to dwell on that too much because I like this matchup too. I think John Lineker looked amazing in his last fight against Marlon Vera. He knocked Marlon down a few times, but it ended up being him winning by decision. And Jimmie looked really good in his last fight against Thomas Almeida. He didn't knock Almeida out, though, and John Lineker has pretty much a rock chin. So I do think Jimmie's going to win this fight, especially since John took it on short notice, but I don't think he's going to knock John out, so I'm going to predict Jimmie Rivera by decision. For the co-main event, we have Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Edson Barboza. And honestly, I'm kind of scared to predict this because I don't want to jinx it. Khabib doesn't really have the best track record on actually showing up to fights, and I heard that like a week ago he was 30 pounds overweight, although he says his weight's fine. Yeah, so I really hope this fight actually happens. It's a perfect grappler versus striker matchup. I think Khabib is an amazing fighter, but I think Edson is too. But however, with Khabib, you can't argue with 24-0. He's cutting from like 200 pounds, so he's a huge 155er. Edson's great, but I don't think he's going to be able to keep Khabib on the outside with his striking. I think Khabib is eventually going to get past the punches, get past the kicks, and he's going to take down Edson. And we're probably going to see 3 rounds of Khabib ground and pounding on Edson Barboza. I don't think he's going to get a TKO or submission. He could, but I don't necessarily think so. I think if this fight actually happens, which I really hope it does, we're going to see Khabib with a dominant decision win over Edson Barboza and then hopefully challenging Tony in the future. Next up, we have the final fight, the main event. This is a matchup that a lot of people thought would never happen, but right here we have Cris Cyborg, who is the champion at featherweight, versus Holm, who was the previous champion at bantamweight. And this is a fight where it could either make my night or completely ruin my night. Before I get into the semantics of the fight, I just want to say you guys should follow me on Instagram at MMA Superboy. I made the account so I can post updates and stuff like when I release videos and other random stuff. I don't really know what I'm going to do with it yet. But anyways, let's start the discussion on this amazing fight. Okay, so Holm was undefeated, and she faced Ronda Rousey, and a lot of people thought Holly had no chance whatsoever in beating Ronda, and Holly ended up knocking out Ronda in the second round, which a lot of people think is the greatest upset of all time. But to me, watching that fight, I knew from the start that Ronda was going to lose. I was walking around saying that for weeks because obviously Holly is an amazing, amazing boxer. She's probably the best woman striker in the UFC, and I knew that Ronda was going to have extreme trouble with that, and she did. At the time, people thought Ronda would never lose, and Holly was the girl that went out there and proved pretty much the whole world wrong. In this situation, I'm one of those people that thinks it's going to happen all over again. I personally think that Cris got exposed in her last fight against Tonya Evinger. Tonya looked horrible at 145. I mean, physically and with her skills. I was like, how is Cris not demolishing her? And I was not impressed by Cyborg. I think it's safe to say that Holly has much more technical striking, and I think that's going to play a big factor. Holly is coming from 135, but she's also slightly bigger than Cyborg. I think the only thing that really makes people hesitate on picking Holly is that little dry spell she had after she got submitted by Misha. She lost to Misha, then she lost to Valentina, and then she lost to Germaine. But honestly, I think that was all in her head. I think she was really beating herself up about losing the title. But let's be honest here. She lost the title by a rear naked choke. There's going to be no ground game in this fight, so you're not going to have to worry about that. I mean, she honestly could be training for like the Boxing World Championships right now, and it would be the same, like, it would still benefit her the same against Cris Cyborg. It's going to be only striking. So in life, they always say go big or go home, and I'm predicting Holly to win by 4th round knockout. I think it's going to be the trademark head kick. She brought it back against Betch Correia, and it's coming back against Cris. It's going to be a 4th round head kick knockout, and then after that, everyone in the world is going to say that Holly is the GOAT of female MMA. that's going to be it for these predictions. Thank y'all so much for watching. I appreciate the support. Hopefully I could help you out a little bit if you weren't sure about a certain prediction. And other than that, all I got to say is if you want to say something, feel free to leave it in the comments, and I'll see you next time.